What are you going to be looking for in an interview, and what are the kinds of things that you would suggest a candidate do to prepare for that interview?
And one thing that's going to be slightly different this year for Booth, so we are retaining the virtual option. So there's 3 ways that you can interview.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us on our podcast today. For those of you who are new here, I am Eric Allen. I am the general manager here at Magoosh, an education tech company that aims to level the playing field by providing high quality, affordable test prep and admission support services. The primary purpose, if I could speak this morning, is to demystify the MBA application process. And so we have here today, I'm super excited to have Kara Northcutt from Chicago Booth here with us today, who's going to talk all things MBA. How are you, Kara?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to this.
Awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe kind of tell us how you got in the industry or a fun fact about yourself, your role at Booth, and then we'll just dive right into it.
All right, you got it. So again, as Eric said, my name is Kara Northcutt. I'm a senior director of admissions for the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, and in November it will be my 15th year with Booth. My start date's always very easy to remember because it was the week that David Booth gave his very sizable donation, and we became Chicago Booth. So that's an easy milestone for me to remember career-wise. And I've had a variety of functions, all under the admissions umbrella for our part-time programs, full-time programs. Currently focus on a lot of our strategic partnerships, Access Magoosh being one of those key partnerships. And when it comes to like finding my way into the industry, a lot of us in higher ed joke about it's kind of like the accidental career path. So I moved up to Chicago after undergrad in like the early 2000s and got my master's in clinical psychology with the ambition to go into community-based nonprofits, traditional counseling, et cetera. But while I was in the program through a financial aid work study program, I started working in their admissions team and really kind of fell in love with that and started learning about higher education as a career path. So kind of did a pivot even right after I graduated from my master's and have been really, really thrilled with the career path and the impact I'm able to have in helping individuals like yourselves navigate this somewhat, intimidating process. We try to really help you through that, demystify those sort of things, as Eric said, and make sure you're comfortable going through it. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
So all in all, she's extremely knowledgeable and definitely someone that I lean on as I have questions and things in the industry. I didn't know that you had this clinical psych background. That's pretty
Yep.
cool. Just out of curiosity, like, do you think there's anything that you learned in like that master's program that you use today? Like, are there like fundamental things in that space that you lean on at times?
Yeah, absolutely. Just a lot of the program was about self-awareness. You have to be very aware of yourself and your emotions and those and feelings because you can easily project those onto other people. So just be, really getting to know who I was, and then in both an undergrad and the graduate programs, there was a focus on really learning about systemic racism and inherent biases, all those sort of things, which have become really helpful and kind of, again, that self-awareness and knowing how some reactions that you may have are completely, unbiased, that are completely unconscious, rather, those sort of things. So kind of unpacking that in a really safe setting was really helped me a lot because I grew up in middle of nowhere, Indiana, very much, no diversity whatsoever. So it really helped kind of expand my perspective and horizons and experiences when it comes to a lot of the cultural aspects that definitely carry over into the admissions work as well.
That's fabulous. Okay, so I see a
Great.
little picture there of downtown Chicago. For
Yep.
those of you who have not been in Chicago, it's a fabulous city, especially in the summer. I have a little gripe because they call the lake the beach, but that's okay. I'm an East Coast. That's okay. We don't have to get into that. But what do you do? What do you love to do in your free time? There's so many things to do in Chicago and surrounding areas. Like, what's your thing, to do on the weekends? If you had, total weekend to yourself, no apps to read, nothing like that, what are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I in Chicago, I live in the Logan Square neighborhood, which is a great neighborhood, and really love just kind of walking around, especially when everyone's out and about. There's always an street festival, arts festivals, things like that going on. So just kind of checking out the neighborhoods, going and having some food on an outdoor patio, and all of that. Really just enjoying it. Just good vibes. Basically, everyone's out and about in Chicago and very very in a good mood and all of that. It's just fun to see different concerts and things that go on throughout the city. So it's kind of a variety. Just really kind of take it all and take in the energy. Yeah.
All right, let's get into some school specific questions. Um, how, when you think about from a candidate perspective, they are looking at all kinds of different schools, trying to figure out, what's the best fit for them and all of that. How do you think Booth differentiates itself from other MBA programs, right? So as they're unpacking and they're hearing like, oh, it sounds like everyone's got the same thing. What are the kind of crystal pieces that you think Booth really possesses that differentiate it from other schools?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And it really comes down to a Booth the flexibility and the ability to customize your experience. So at Booth, our curriculum has what we call more of like a framework that you take classes within, opposed to a core curriculum. So there's actually no academic courses that everyone has to take. Rather, we give you the ability to start with the foundations. So say you come in with an English degree and haven't had the traditional business classes, you start with the foundational classes and build from there. But otherwise, if you are a practicing CPA, you would take a more advanced accounting class, for example. So we really give you, the students, the freedom and flexibility to craft your own curriculum, focus on the areas that you really want to, particularly thinking about summer internship. You don't have to wait till 2 years until your second year to take certain classes that might benefit that. So you can really kind of manage that and build the curriculum based on your interests, both personally and professionally. But you're not alone in that. I always want to remind people that even though you have the choice, you have tons of resources, advisors, et cetera, that can really help you craft that curriculum. But that customization and flexibility really stands out when compared to other schools.
When you think like as a candidate, flexibility, how does a candidate think about flexibility and the benefit of that, right? So you say flexibility. How would you recommend then that students leverage that flexibility to take full advantage of the fact that Booth is offering that? Like, is it more gives you the ability to take things outside of Booth, gives you the ability to dig in deeper to areas? Like, what are some of the ways that you encourage students once they get there to actually take advantage of some of that flexibility?
Yeah, really all of the above. So it's the simple way to think about it is 20 academic courses are required, and then everybody also participates. The one required part is that the leadership exploration and development, which is much more experiential, interactive that you go through during your orientation and all of that. So with the course itself, the flexibility really allows you to go out of your comfort zone. That's one of my pieces of advice I always give is take something that's a little bit new to you, or a faculty that might have the reputation might be, oh, that's a really difficult class, but it was also my favorite class, as a lot of like second years or alumni might said. So really gives you hopefully that courage and confidence to take those classes, because you're going to be supported by your classmates, by the faculty, and all of my colleagues who are really the student support staff that help you through that. And really thinking about career goals and what classes might help you get into that. If you're thinking, finance, the investments tracks, there's an analytical finance concentration you can go down. Or if you're much more interested in the leadership piece, you can go deep into the leadership classes. There's a class called interpersonal dynamics that's very intensive, but if students really want to develop that leadership and that kind of those interpersonal things, so you can go either way. Booth has a reputation, which is fine, of being very, very quant, which it can be, but it also can be as little quant as you want as well. Given all that flexibility, you can focus much more on some of the softer skill classes if that's what you're looking to build in the program. So it cuts a lot of different ways when it comes to the flexibility.
Awesome. I think also in the world of social media, I think those interpersonal skills could be really valuable to folks
Yeah.
these days. So that sounds like an amazing class. What is something maybe that a candidate who is scouring the website, sees all this, the great stuff about Booth? What is something maybe that doesn't get fully captured on your website that you want candidates to know about Booth?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think it's hard to see that on a website. And again, I mentioned the reputation of the analytical rigor and all of that, which we're proud of. But students have such a great time in the program and develop lifelong friendships and partnerships. I'm constantly seeing, especially in the summertime, pictures on Instagram of wedding parties that are all boothies, that sort of thing. So it's really fun and social. And there are battle of the bands. There's booth follies. All these ways that you can really showcase your interests and talents outside of the classroom and outside of your professional world. So students really have a great time in the program. The 2 years goes fast, so you really want to embrace it and do as much as you can in the programs. So I think that's something that's hard to portray on a website and just kind of reputationally, maybe not necessarily something that comes up when you hear Chicago Booth.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a lot of the folks that we work with here at Magoosh and Access come from under-resourced backgrounds. How does Booth help to kind of level the playing field for applicants from underrepresented and economically disadvantaged backgrounds? What are some of the resources available, and what are some of the suggestions that you have for them to get involved with Booth?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to kind of the point that you might be right now in researching schools, our partnerships, of course, with Access and other organizations like Jumpstart, Posse, et cetera, is one way that we really try to get in front of get in front of candidates that maybe, might be intimidated by Booth or another top school and have there's like this preemptive imposter syndrome that happens sometimes, like, oh, I'll never get in there, I'll never get in there, and that sort of thing. So we try to, as an admissions team, try to make you comfortable and make you realize that Booth can be on your consideration list and all of that, and really help kind of give personal guidance as much as we can throughout the process. And then once you're in the school, there are student groups that are really great to lean on. We have our African American business group, Hispanic American, Pride, Armed Forces, etc. Leaning on those students and really kind of finding your community and finding individuals that have similar backgrounds, etc., can really help you feel at home in the program. And then the administration as well. So I think sometimes students don't realize there's literally hundreds of us that are there to make sure you have a great experience, from academic advising. So if you're struggling in a class, they can help make sure you know the TAs and go through any like tutoring programs that you might need to brush up on things. And then there's our wellness team and our diversity, equity, inclusion that all generally fall under the dean of students. So they're to support you through any challenges. Like even just this week, there's a student having a personal challenge. They talk to the wellness individual, and with their permission, they talk to me about some options a student might have to kind of change the pace of the program to help help support in this other challenging time that has nothing to do with the MBA, but we just want to be there for you as a whole person. So really taking advantage of those resources that come up. So it could be academic, it could be social, and then of course just getting to know people, leaning on the student groups as well, and of course career services, which we could get more into, of course, as well when it comes to the career support.
Awesome. Sounds like it's a comprehensive set
Yeah,
of kind of offerings for candidates, not only to get in, but also to thrive once they get there,
yeah, to
which is
succeed,
like,
exactly.
you don't
Yeah,
want to get in somewhere where you can't actually succeed. So that's great to hear.
yeah.
All right, let's transition a little bit to just thinking about the overall application process. So putting, your thinking around a candidate now who's going through this process or thinking about going through this process. You've been doing this in different capacities, as you mentioned at the outset, for about 15 years. How would you recommend that a candidate approaches this process? Like, how much time would you set aside? And maybe what are some of the areas that you found over your career where candidates may struggle, like may hit that kink in the road? So can you give us some thoughts on that?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So when it comes to kind of the research aspect, so thinking about the traditional rounds process, so round one, typically late September, round two, typically in January. So during the spring before that and the summer is a great time to really start doing the research. And one positive that came out of COVID is that we developed and have retained a very large volume of virtual options. So it's not like you have to come to campus. We absolutely know that not everyone can, either financially, time, family, whatever it may be. And that is not evaluative at all. We don't have any sort of anything on our form about did they come to campus or anything like that. but we do want to see your demonstrated interest. So now there are webinars. Like I would start with a general information session about the program, and do the same for other programs you're looking at, maybe in like the late spring, early summer. And then some of the programs, like we were on the road a lot this summer recruiting and having receptions with current students and alumni. So engaging in those if we happen to be in your city. So using that as a research time. Actually, I'm going to step back, maybe even like thinking a year out. The exam is a big part of that too. So, kind of to go on a tangent, that's what's probably going to take the most time. And the GMAT or GRE, those tests are good for 5 years. So, I always recommend to someone even thinking about an MBA, even if it's a couple years down the road, get that out of the way first and then focus on the research and the rest of the application, that sort of thing. Because that test is going to be most likely required for any school that's not school specific. So trying to get that, get the score you're happy with and knowing it's good for 5 years. That's a benefit because it puts a clock on you. So you don't keep pushing off the application because that's very easy to do. And then once that's done, you can focus on those pieces. So again, back to kind of spring and summer is a great time to research the programs. And then come and visit campus if you can in the fall is a good time to visit at booths, specifically like October, November. But when it comes to like time, like it really depends on the person. Webinars are an hour here and there. And then I would always suggest reaching out to students and alumni and setting up coffees, Zoom chats, whatever it may be, just to help you get a variety of perspectives as you go through the process. So it's hard to put an exact time on it, but a few hours a week I think would be really helpful as you're researching and all of that, and then shifting the application. Use that same time then for the essays, talking to your recommenders and all that, which I know we'll get more into.
Yeah, I mean it is a process, right? Like, and I think it's a great call out for you to talk about getting the test over with as early as possible. I do talk to our access members about that quite a bit, especially like if you're graduating from college, like you're probably the best test taker you'll ever be. So there's no
Agreed.
real downside to not taking the test immediately after college or even your senior year in college. So that was really great. When you think about the elements of the application process, and we'll talk more about this in a little bit, but are there elements of that, like you talked about the test, or essays or other things in the process that maybe candidates over or undervalue in your mind, like as they're kind of going through this kind of holistic process?
Mhm. Yeah, because it is, as you said, it is truly holistic. I'm sure candidates might roll their eyes when they hear that, but it's true. In the schools, we all have this holistic approach. We look at everything, and there's not like a specific weight at booth we have for the different areas like academics, work experience, because on the individual level, it can vary. So, for example, if someone has more, maybe 7 or 8 years of work experience, then their undergraduate, involvement, groups and clubs, not that it's not important, but it's not as important as the more recent experiences in your application. On the flip side, if someone is just 1 to 2 years out, we're going to have to lean more heavily on your academic experience because you just don't have that tenure of work experience yet. So but when it comes to like what's undervalued, that one of my favorite parts, or I shouldn't say favorite, but an impactful part, is the letters of recommendation. It really is the only part of the application that it's a third party perspective on your candidacy. So really being thoughtful about who you choose. And again, we can go into more details about that later, but it might not be something candidates give as much thought to as perhaps the essays and in the exam, which I completely understand. Those take more time and all of that. But the letters of recommendation are really a critical part of the evaluation and getting to the interview, and then hopefully getting to be admitted as well.
Great. I'm gonna ask you a follow up question on that in a little
Please.
bit here, on letters of rec. I guess, as again thinking about the holistic application process, there's
Mhm.
now a ton of other ways that candidates can get support. Right? There's programs like Access Fellows, obviously, that provide guidance. There's consultants, admissions consultants. There's now Chat GPT and other AI
Yep.
tools. Um, What's your general recommendation to candidates, in terms of utilizing these additional resources in a way that allows them to still go through the process of self-reflection that you talked about is so important in your master's degree studies, and also then drives an authentic voice? How do they use resources and still maintain all of those other things that you want to see as an evaluator in this process?
Yeah, it's tricky, and like the consultants, some people have access to consultants and can afford, then some cannot. So, very much have good relationship with the consulting organizations, and they do add value. But I don't want anyone to think that you have to have a consultant to get into top tier schools. That's absolutely not true. It's not something we can really tell from your application, and they should really be. If you're using consultants or any other resources, really be kind of on the editing. No one else can tell your story, right? But more so in like helping to edit essays, keep you on track, set deadlines for you, that sort of thing, to make sure you're achieving the different pieces. But frankly, and I'm not just saying this because I'm talking to Eric right now, I find that programs like Access that give kind of the individual coaching, getting feedback from your peers can be just as effective, if not more, than the traditional MBA consultant. So leveraging those resources. When it comes to like the test prep, there are free practice tests you can find on the GMAT website. There's probably more affordable and if not even free resources you can find online that can help you coach you through the process when it comes to that. But yeah, the essays need to be your story and your voice, and it's sometimes easy to tell when someone's submitting somewhat of a generic essay they're trying to reuse, or something that maybe somebody else helped with that didn't really have knowledge of the individual person or the school they might be applying to. So kind of a mixed answer. I think if you of course can leverage those resources, great, but please don't feel like you have to have an admissions consultant to get admissions. It's definitely not the case.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the application itself and maybe some strategies around that. You talked about recommenders, so let's start there.
Yeah.
What's kind of your advice for choosing the best recommenders, and specifically, well, let's start there, and I'll have a follow up question. Kind of, what's your advice for choosing the best recommender?
Absolutely. I always encourage people to think about the recency and the relationship. So, generally speaking, schools are going to require two letters of recommendation, and one of those is suggested to be from a current manager or supervisor. But we don't require that because it's not always viable. If you are thinking about full time, potentially leaving your company, that might be a very good reason you're not comfortable talking to your manager yet. So you could think about someone else in your current professional world, whether it's a mentor, a previous manager, or someone again you are comfortable talking about your MBA journey with them. Or it could be, if you're a consultant, sometimes we've seen clients, if that's okay, kind of with NDAs and those sort of things. If you have that, you have to be mindful. But and then the second one could also be professional in nature, or it could be if you're involved with a community-based organization, maybe on a board for a nonprofit, something along those lines. You could bring in somebody from that aspect of your life as well. But really think about the recency of it. So if you were an undergrad and maybe for a TA, 5-6 years ago for a faculty member, that might not be the best person to ask because that's not exactly a reflection of who you are now, who you are in the workplace, that sort of thing. So again, think about the recency and then the relationship. Have they seen you go through challenges? Have they seen you and been there for the wins? Kind of both sides, because we're looking for letters that are authentic. No one's perfect. We don't expect you to come to an MBA program to come out the exact same person, right? So we want the recommenders to also be able to give examples of, here's areas they could focus on, and here's areas they've really thrived and will bring to the classroom at booth. So again, thinking about the relationship, recency. Don't get caught up in someone's title or that they have to be an alum of any school. That comes up a lot. Like, I don't know any alumni. That's totally fine. Great if there is an alumni that you're close with or you work for, but there's no advantage to that. And sometimes people, we can tell, will choose a really impressive title, but then the letter might only be a paragraph, and like, they kind of know this person, but haven't really kind of seen you or been with you in the trenches to be able to write a really, really specific and detailed letter of recommendation.
And like to follow up on the points you made about not having your boss
Mhm.
provide a recommendation. Do you like to see that in the optional, like a why you didn't use your like a short? Is that something you prefer to see?
Yes, yeah, it's a great question. We even have a specific section under the recommendations tab in the application where you explain why you chose your recommenders. So that's exactly where you can mention, even sometimes it's that you've only been with them for 3 months, that sort of thing. So, yes, absolutely explain that. We'd much rather know than kind of be left wondering, I wonder why they didn't choose their current supervisor. Definitely be candid about that.
Awesome. And then when you think about recommendation letters, the hard part for you must be like, here you are evaluating recommendations that, call it 90%, maybe more, are positive in nature.
Yeah.
And there's probably a very small percentage where they just They just misinterpreted the support that
It
they were
happens.
going to get from that person. But the majority of them are going to be positive. So, how do you, as an evaluator, um, seek to find the exceptional recommendations and maybe seek to find the recommendations that are complementary in nature, but not so supportive that they give you a sense that it's a strong recommendation? Like, what is that nuance? Like, what are some of the
Yeah.
things you're looking for?
Yeah, it is nuanced, and it's funny you say that. So from Booth, what your recommender will receive is there's like a grid. Basically, they will rank you on certain characteristics like conflict resolution, interpersonal skills, those sort of things. So it's just kind of a scale they rank on. If someone gives the highest, I think it's like truly exceptional right now on all of those, that's kind of a red flag, right? Again, no one's perfect coming into this. You shouldn't expect to, feel like you have to put on that kind of this perfect persona. So we like it when we see a variety there. And then when it comes to the letter itself, the best letters have specific examples. And I think this is where you, as a candidate, can, when you're meeting with your recommenders, it's okay to give them kind of, here's an outline, here's some highlights of projects we did together, here's something, it helps to refresh their memory, because then those letters become really impactful. They give really good examples and talk about specifics in the workplace or on the board, whatever it may be. So those are the ones that really stand out, rather than just like kind of the generic, oh, I've observed them work well in teams, but without those examples, it just doesn't mean as much.
Okay, so Bavin, who's my boss, if you're listening, if you have to write me a recommendation, please, I know you want to give me all perfects. You can't do that. You've already heard Kara say it's not going to work. So let's just move on. No, that's awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.
So let's switch gears to the interview process, right? So
Yep.
with Chicago Booth, it is an invitation interview, right?
Correct.
So I just got the invitation for interview. I'm super excited. What are you going to be looking for in an interview, and what are the kinds of things that you would suggest a candidate do to prepare for that interview?
Yep, absolutely. And one thing that's going to be slightly different this year for Booth, so we are retaining the virtual option. So there's three ways that you can interview, and there is no advantage to either, or disadvantage for that matter. So you can do it fully virtual, kind of like we're doing now, Eric and I, or you could come to campus and do it in person. That would most likely be with a current student, one of our admissions fellows, or you could do it in your city with most likely an alumni. Again, no preference, whichever works best for you. We don't want you to kind of go out of your way or bend over backwards to do it in person if that's just not viable for you. But what we're looking for, really is looking for authenticity and consistency between the application and the interview. So your interviewer will not have read your application. As I said, it's most likely a current student or an alumni who have been trained on the process and selected. You have to be selected to be one of our interviewers, and they will not have seen your application. And it's intentionally a blind process, because if they would have read your application already, they have an opinion on your candidacy. So all they will have is your resume. They're not going to know test scores, not going to know, unless you put it on your resume, GPA or anything like that. So they have your resume and have a conversation. So it's very conversational in nature. And don't be surprised if they're asking the same questions you've already answered in the application. Again, we're looking for that consistency. So the story, your narrative that you're working on now, even though that very well may change once you're in the program, we totally get that. Having that consistent narrative throughout is really impactful, because it's a red flag if you're talking all about consulting in the application, and then in the interview it's all about impact investing, right? There's kind of there's a mismatch there. So being consistent, being professional, on time, personable, all those things that I know Access will coach you to do. And then one of the number one mistakes we see is the interviewers will say, oh, they had no questions for me. Like, even though you don't know this person going into it necessarily, have some just like even somewhat generic questions, like, why did you go to Booth? That sort of thing. Have at least two or three questions prepared, because that shows your interest. Again, it should be a two-way conversation, particularly with the way we do our interviews at Booth. So does that help a little bit, Eric?
Yes, it does, and I'm glad you mentioned the questions, because I think people get so focused on the interview,
Yeah,
like what are they going to ask me, that they forget to prepare. Like, what are you going to ask the interview? It's a conversation, right? So it's like
exactly.
it's so important to have that. So that's a fabulous point that you make there. As a follow up to that, with you as an admissions leader, when you have questions about a candidate, how do you, because you're not going to be the one that's going to be able to kind of dig into a question, how do you find out the answer to that question, and or knowing that it's a blind interview, should candidates proactively address things that they may feel were maybe holes in their application in the interview specifically? Do you recommend against that, or do you feel like that's something that really should come through in the application itself? Those types of mitigants.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think more so that would be more natural to come up in the application. You can always use the optional essay to talk about any what you perceive as a weakness in the application. Yeah, the interviewers aren't going to be asking specifically, what classes you took, how you did in undergrad, that sort of thing. But having said that, I do think it's important, and and hopefully feel comfortable and confident. If there's something that you really want to share with the interview that didn't come up organically at the end, you can say, oh, Eric, there's one more thing, one more story I'd love to share with you. And just that didn't come up in the interview. Absolutely feel comfortable doing that. Any good interviewer should be like, oh, absolutely. I would love to hear, something that you still want to share. So I would definitely suggest that if there's something you really want to talk about, just didn't come up, the interviewer didn't ask about, feel comfortable bringing that up maybe at the end of the application, or at the end of the interview rather, as you wrap up.
Awesome. So candidates, they already know your test scores. They already know all the things you've already said. You don't have to say them again. However, if there's something that you want to articulate that doesn't come up naturally, then that might be an opportunity to use that. So that's fabulous. All right, let's
Absolutely.
talk about the one area that people love to talk about: test scores.
Yeah.
So first of all, GMAT, GRE, what tests you're using, how you all think about it, optionality, why you use the test. That's obviously a huge topic right now. So why don't you just kind of let's address this elephant in the room and talk about how you think about test scores, how you use them, and what's the general approach for how candidates should think about submitting test scores.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So for Booth, it is still required. So we accept the GMAT or the GRE, and we truly have no preference. I honestly just take whichever one you'll think you'll do best at after you take a couple practice tests, and we will accept the current versions and the new versions of both tests that you may or may not be aware of that are coming out. So Booth will accept those. We know that those scores are going to be different, so we'll report those out as clearly as we can. We're very candid about our test score averages, and it is one factor in the holistic process, and there is correlation with test scores and GPAs and Booth, that sort of thing. So there is somewhat of a predictor of success, but we know it's not the only predictor, obviously. But it does show that you have the some of the integrative reasoning skills, critical thinking, some of those skills that are going to be pretty, or not pretty, but very critical throughout the MBA. So it is helpful in that. And we always take your highest score. Most candidates take the exam more than once. That's totally fine. We're going to take the highest score into consideration. You don't have to report all your scores. You can just report your highest one if you want to. I'm trying to think of other things on the exam. I feel like there was another question you had in there.
One question that I have on that is a lot of times candidates will go in really stressed out, round one apps. They want to get the app in. Maybe they didn't score the exact score that they wanted. They want to keep taking it. Will you take a look at submissions post application submission? Like, can I give an update and say, hey, Kara, like I just did better. Like, I was just really stressed during round one application process or round two application process, but I took it again. I did much better. Will you consider additional scores after the submission?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. Particularly if you get waitlisted, absolutely. But just be mindful; it's a pretty quick turnaround. So the application, once it's submitted, we start reading that first read to decide if you're invited to interview, like right away. So it's one of those things that if the timing doesn't work out, or it might even be better to just wait to round two. There is no difference between round one, round two. If I were applying, I would be totally comfortable applying to round two. I'd rather submit, and I'd rather see your best round two application than a round one that you're not fully confident in. So keep that in mind as well. And yeah, so it just depends. So generally, yes, especially if waitlisted, we can accept materials, but the timing, we just might not have that new score in time, and you want to make sure we have it as soon as possible so you get hopefully invited to that interview piece.
Awesome. And it's a great transition into kind of thinking about the admissions process. You
Yeah.
talked a little bit about, you'll kind of start looking at these apps right away. So help the listener to the podcast understand how. I think I muted myself. That might have been a button my wife has upstairs. So think about generally the admissions process. Can you walk us through I submit the application. What happens? It goes to ops. When does it come in front of you? Who reads it? How many people see it? Walk us through that whole process, if you
Yeah,
will.
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It varies a little bit year to year. We're constantly reevaluating it and tweaking our process. But for Booth specifically, it's by and large admissions staff that read the applications. We used to use students and alumni. We've now just we use them for the interviews only. They don't read applications anymore. So pretty much our full admissions staff, from the marketing folks, have a hand in reading. Sometimes there's like group reads. Generally, the first read is going to be a little bit of a quicker read because it's at that point where we're deciding if we want to invite to interview. So maybe 1 to 2 readers at that point. There have been times we've used auxiliary readers, which is pretty common for schools, for just that first read. And then if you're selected to interview, once the interview report is back, it comes back to different team members. So there's multiple sets of eyes on it. So I wouldn't read your application first and then read it, again only, right? There'd be other individuals on my team that come to make those final decisions that, for like round one, for example, will come out late November. So it's generally admissions staff. At Booth, and we don't have, there's only very few exceptions to this, like faculty, other, deans, et cetera, outside admissions are not involved in the process. That does vary school to school. So it's really the admissions team that focuses on the evaluation and the decisions.
And as you're going through the process, let's say you've done kind of your initial read, you get the interview feedback, and now you're in deciding stage. Um, is that a, these are no brainers pile, these are no brainer not so great pile, and then there's obviously most of the discussion is going to be the ones that are like you're trying to decide between this candidate or that
Exactly.
candidate on the margin. How are those decisions made? Is there, I'm sure there's a lot of discussion around it, but can you just give us some insight into how those discussions happen, and how you get outcomes for the class out of the folks that are on the border?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's kind of how it breaks down. And yeah, it's discussions with the deans, discussions with colleagues and with, different industries. Like we're pretty fortunate. We're a larger program. So we bring in around 620 traditional MBA students every fall. So we don't really have to worry as much about any company or industry being too dominant, but we do look up at the composition of the class and see what, unique perspective does that person bring in, that sort of thing. And then of course there's always, you could be waitlisted, which means you're still being considered. I know it's very hard to be on that wait list and you're literally just waiting. But yeah, it's kind of group discussions and kind of constantly looking at the composition of the class as offers are accepted, rejected, that sort of thing. So it's pretty fluid there as we're making those final decisions.
And can you talk a little bit about Booth's financial aid process? So, are you making financial aid awards along with acceptances, or is that a separate part of your process?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up. So, and this is something that you as candidates, every school is going to have a little bit of a different approach when it comes to scholarships. So, Booth is a merit based scholarship. So, generally speaking, when you're admitted, you find out your level of merit based scholarship. So, at the time of admission. And then when it comes to financial aid in the form of student loans, as soon as you're admitted, you can start working with our financial aid team directly. They can coach you through the FAFSA application if you're looking for federal student loans. If you are coming in on a student visa, you would have to work with them in like the private student loan process. We have lenders that we work with. So it really can happen, as soon as you're admitted. But generally speaking, with the scholarships at the time of admission, we are still talking about this. I'm being a little hesitant because we're still talking about any changes we want to make for this year with scholarships, that sort of thing. But we'll have that all decided, obviously, before, and we keep our website up to date and all of that. But generally, like I said, you'll know that award at the time of admission. That will be reflected in your letter. Again, it's merit based compared to like needs based. Some schools have needs based, so people will sometimes make a really solid needs based case for Booth, but that's just not how we do it, right? So thinking about the merits of your application, your work experience, perspective you'll add to the classroom, those sort of things are more what we're looking for. And we know it's tricky for you as candidates because it does vary school to school. There's no separate application. Your Booth application is your application. There's nothing you have to submit additional for any scholarship consideration.
No, that's great. Maybe you all should push the negotiation class to second year so that they don't keep negotiating with you on
Yeah,
these
exactly.
scholarships. And I will say to candidates listening to the podcast, that Booth has been a very generous giver of financial aid to our Access members over the years, and we've been able to. We have it's not because Kara's on. We actually have data around that. So
Yeah.
for what that's worth, they are quite generous as it relates to top candidates. You have a great background, they want you there, and they're going to show you in that way. So I think that's fabulous. As you think about the overall, like your role, right, is really challenging because, well, you do get to travel, which is cool, but you also have to satisfy so many stakeholders, right? You hear from professors. If you don't send amazing candidates, which you do, so you don't hear
Yeah.
from them very much, but you hear from other students, you hear from alums, you hear from all these folks. How much are you thinking about all of these different stakeholders as you're evaluating candidates? You talked about bigger class and having the ability to
Yeah.
manage a portfolio. How much does that enter into your mind at all as you think about the admissions process?
Yeah, that's a great question. Not as much when it comes to like the admissions, the evaluation, that sort of thing. But once people are admitted, we do think about it. So sometimes someone that gets admitted, interested in private equity, might choose Wharton over Booth. So we might leverage our private equity faculty that focus in those areas at the yield part to really help them talk to admitted students about why Booth is a great place for that and that sort of thing. So leveraging in that regard, but no, not like a huge consideration. Faculty, generally speaking at Booth, I mean this in a positive way, kind of stay out of it. They'll ask questions here and there. I work with on one of our smaller programs, the Civic Scholars Program. That's for those in nonprofit and government. There are faculty involved in the interviews. So admissions decides if someone's generally admissible, but then they help select who actually gets this very specific scholarship. So that's one nuance to it. And they're, of course, looking for individuals with solid nonprofit and government backgrounds coming in so they can bring in their expertise there. So it's really more we think about that, I would say, at the yielding phase when we're trying to get you to accept our offers, when we're thinking about how we can leverage those stakeholders to really help you understand the full scope of Booth and how it could really be a great place for you compared to some other schools.
Awesome. All right. Now I've treated you well so far, but I have to say that now we're getting into the tough part of the podcast where it's the myth
I'm here
versus
for it.
reality section. So I'm going to
Mm-hmm.
force you to give me an answer. And this is the fun part too. So
Okay.
I'm going to give you a statement. You're going to say fact or fiction, and then you're going to give me a little bit of context, if you don't mind, of
Got
why
it.
you chose that. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. All right. Good. Um, the first question is you have the best chance to apply to get in if you apply round one.
False. Yeah. I just mentioned a second ago, between round one and round two, chances are very similar, if not the same. Same with scholarship. There's plenty of scholarship budget for round one and round two. And we do admit, of course, off round three, but I would focus on round one or round two. But between that, whenever you feel like you've got the best application.
Okay. And fact or fiction, there's money available in round three.
Oh, in fact, yeah, absolutely. Yes,
Hmm.
because money, if someone declines an offer that scholarship, it's pretty fluid when it comes to the scholarship budget. So maybe not as much, but yes, technically, yes.
Okay, cool. Fact or fiction, there's nothing you can do to get off the wait list.
I think that's fiction. Generally, we're looking for if you're submitting anything that that you feel will shift our decision. Was it like a promotion, something like significant that's changed from the time that you applied is worth sharing. So it's certainly people can do get off the wait list all the time, but yeah, you don't really need to restate your whole application. It's really thinking about submitting things that's changed. Maybe you did retake the test, or again promotions or some accolade or group you've joined. Some of those sort of things are worth letting us know about.
Awesome. Okay. Fact or fiction, there is a minimum amount of work experience you need to get into Chicago Booth.
Fiction in that, yeah, there is no set. We have no set parameters when it comes to that. But generally speaking, like the average is around 5 years or so for the full time program, because we are looking for individuals who've had at least some experience to know what they want to do, at least in the short term, career wise. And we do have our deferred enrollment program, so you can apply during undergrad, but then you are required to go work for a few years before you matriculate. So technically, no minimum, but you're going to have a better chance of admissions if you have a few years, and it's really more about quality over quantity of your experience. So sometimes in consulting, a year of consulting can be, you can get a lot more exposure to industries, et cetera, than a different type of job, for example. So really thinking about that. And it's all about your personal timing. So if you're applying early in your career, really letting us know, why is now the right time? Why are you confident now is the right time to get your MBA, and really sharing that story? So again, no minimums, but we do look for that. It's one of the factors we do look at, is that level of and quality of work experience you've had.
Excellent. Okay. Um, Fact or fiction, candidates have to score within 80% of the standardized test score or within 80% of the GPA to be considered for Booth.
Oh, I would say fiction. So if you look at our ranges, they're very wide when it comes to the test scores for GMAT, for example. It's like upper 500s up to the upper 700s. So there's a much wider range. And we've even been talking about reporting median as opposed to average, because we think people just look at some of like top tier schools, and we'll see those scores and just get like intimidated, like I talked about the top of this, and just be like, oh, I'll never get in. But the range is so wide, and it's one of many things we look at. So definitely not required. We know some people that have English as their second language, their verbal score it might be lower, but they are incredibly fluent in English, that sort of thing. So we take those things into consideration as well.
Fact or fiction, um, you should always take an opportunity to write in the optional essay. Um, Even if you don't have anything to like mitigate, you should take the opportunity to write something in there that tells something else about your story, fact or fiction.
Oh, fiction. Yeah, in no way required. Optional means optional. I will say, though, generally speaking, candidates will use it or think it should be used to explain a perceived weakness, which is totally fine. Maybe difficult year in undergrad. Maybe you were supporting family, working, etc. Of course, talk about those things. Any gaps in your employment, which is totally fine if you've had that. There are many reasons, particularly over the last 3 to 5 years, that people might have a gap in employment. But if there is something that you feel really illustrates like who you are and why you'd be a great fit at Booth or any other school, you could also use it to talk about something positive. Again, it doesn't always need to be something that is a perceived weakness, but it's in no way required. We ask exactly what we want to know and ask in the application. We're pretty straightforward and direct in our application. So fiction that you have to do it, but totally fine if you want to use it for something that you feel is positive or just didn't fit into some of the other essay questions that you really want the committee to know.
All right, now I'm making this up on the fly because this is what I do. But we're gonna change fact and fiction, and I'm gonna ask you to give me one fact about Booth that you think is interesting that maybe people don't know about, and then
Oh
I'm
my
gonna
gosh.
I'm gonna ask you to give me one fiction or one misconception about Booth. I probably could think of one if you can and can lead you in that direction. But one fact, just fun fact about the school that you think is really interesting, and then one fiction that you hear a lot of candidates saying, you're just like, gosh, no, it's not that. Like, so one fact, one fiction from Kara about Chicago Booth.
Okay, I'll start with the fiction. So the fiction is that you have to come in with a huge experience or a large amount of experience in quantitative areas. So it's absolutely fine that you don't have that. Booth is known as this quant school, but we like to think of it as more realistic. It's a data school. We always have been, and now that's relevant. And I would encourage you to try to kind of flip that narrative and positively reframe it and think about, so while that might be challenging the program, what you're going to get out of that. You're going to become a critical thinker. You're going to have the skill set that employers want and expect from MBAs. So even if that's a little bit out of your comfort zone, really try to embrace that and that data driven approach. It does, again, you do not have to have a computer science background or a finance background, any of that coming in. We actually enjoy students who have very different backgrounds when it comes education wise, and they add a lot of diversity and unique perspective, like liberal arts backgrounds, et cetera, really add a ton of value. I'm trying to think about a fact specifically.
Chicago pizzas, 4,000 calories per slice. I
Yeah,
don't know.
well, I will say that like Chicago is a wonderful place to live. That's obviously an opinion, but I consider it a fact. And a lot of the full-time students live downtown. So the building behind me is our downtown campus. A lot of students live just across the river there. So you kind of get the best of both worlds when it comes to Hyde Park, where the classes are. And it is really a great city. And the winters are not that bad. All you have to do is get a good pair of boots, a good coat, and all of that. They're very 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 easy ways to really embrace the winter and survive that. So
Well, that's a good point, because I was going to ask you before our rapid fire round about like student engagement. So I've been to the building, obviously, to meet with you and others.
mhm.
And it's a beautiful building, and it's really set up well for engagement interaction. But you talked about that. So talk us through student life. So,
Yeah.
where do folks live? If they live downtown, what's the commute like to campus? How much time do they spend, say, downtown versus, um, is it Hyde Park campus?
Yep, Hyde Park campus,
So, like,
Harbor.
can you just talk a little bit about the dynamics for those who won't get an opportunity to visit?
Yep, absolutely. So there are like two or three high rises right across the river in this picture, where I'd say about 60% of the full time students live. So you have a built in community there. So it's basically, they effectively become booth dorms. So you can hang out. There's, pools, rec rooms, gyms, all that. You're going to organically run into people. They are great spaces to have meetings, etc. We also have the campus behind me and part of NBC Tower downtown that have really nice study rooms that you can rent. So if you just have a day you don't have classes and want to be downtown, you can do that. And then the students, the other 40% might live in Hyde Park, or if they already live in Chicago, just kind of live wherever they see fit. People with families or partners might want to have more of a quiet neighborhood. So there's a variety of options there. But if you live downtown, students generally take the Metro train, which is a train that has specific times. That's very easy. Then it's like a 20-minute train ride, then like a 7-minute walk to the Harper Center where your classes will be. So classes, there's a morning section, an afternoon section. It really depends. The day of the week will change quarter to quarter. So you might have a couple days that you don't have class, that you might be on campus though for student group events, social events, things like that. So it's a good blend. And I've heard, talking to alumni and their friends who went to other schools in major cities, their students were kind of or their classmates were all over the city. There weren't like a handful of buildings like Booth has. And I just that never like crystallized with me until she told me, especially during COVID times, that they were able to really get to know each other, hang out in person, kind of unsanctioned. There weren't school sanctioned activities at that point. But, and that's been a really big benefit to have those like basically booth dorms downtown, as opposed to people living all over different parts of cities, or even some of the less urban areas that schools might have. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing. I mean, that
Yeah,
really, I think, articulates what the community at Booth is like. It's like you're in this city, but you're in this kind of very
yeah,
smallish group of folks, and have that community there, both downtown, it sounds like, and on campus, which is awesome. So
absolutely.
thanks for
Yeah.
sharing that. Okay, rapid fire round. In this round, I'm going to give you a statement, and you are going to respond with a one word, or, because we're friends, a some word answer.
Got it.
And the first thing that comes to your mind after I give you this statement. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Uh, First one is the perfect candidate.
uh, Non-existent and boring. Nobody's perfect, right? So we accept everyone, foibles and all. So really, yeah, no, it was, of course, want to strive to be our best, but no, doesn't exist.
I love it. Boring and
Yes,
non-existent. That's
perfection's
awesome.
boring.
All right.
Yeah.
The feeling of getting accepted into your dream program.
Elation and pride.
Awesome. The GMAT.
Stressful. Yeah.
I think I just heard an amen, and it's not a live one. So,
Yeah.
all right. Admissions myths.
Oh, I guess yeah. The round one thing, that you have to apply to round one. That's just not true, and that's not going to be true for other schools you're looking at either. So that's something we like to dispel. Yeah.
Awesome. Top 20 MBA program.
um, all have various strengths, and you'll find the right fit for you. There's so many options, and there's strengths within each school and areas of focus. So you'll definitely find you have a great selection here, with the U.S. schools specifically. Absolutely, yeah.
All right. And the last one, most important one, Chicago booth.
Oh yeah, it's like Disneyland. That's so cheesy to say, but there's one alumni who have him on the panels all the time. He came from south side of Chicago and talked about, how it became his dream school from, just observing a person in his life who would, go work downtown every day. And every time he's on a panel, it's like Booth is like Disneyland. So it gets to that fun thing. There's so much you can do, so much you can get involved with, so much at your fingertips, take advantage of. So I know it's a silly answer, but it was the first thing that came to mind. So
Excellent. Who does not like Disneyland,
I
Disney
know.
World? Okay. Is there anything that we didn't get a chance to cover that you'd like to talk about before we conclude?
I just would say for your listeners, like we really value this partnership with Access, and we want to really help you through this process. So myself and my admissions colleagues do coffee chats, a ton of different events. So if you're not sure, just reach out to us directly. We can put you in the right direction, and if at all possible, we'll open back up for visits in the fall. So it's a great time to come visit if you can. And we are currently working on our diversity weekend, which will be we are aiming for early November. So keep an eye out for all of that. But don't sit and be left wondering about something. Reach out to us. Eric can always connect you with me. Really, we just want you to really be comfortable connecting with the admissions teams as you go throughout this process. We're really here to help.
Right. And our goal hopefully is like, Kara is amazing, as you all can tell. And it's like, just reach out. Like she's actually just
Exactly.
normal. Like she wants you to get in. She wants to support you. And there
Exactly.
are more Karas behind the scene at booth, right? So
Yep. Absolutely.
there she has a whole team that's there working alongside with her. And it's a great place to be. So Kara, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with us today. We know you're in the middle of travel season, you're in the middle of busy season, and it's hard to get this much time. So we truly, truly appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Happy to do it again anytime. Thank you. I really appreciate you, Eric, and the work you and your team are doing.
Wonderful. We learned a lot from you, and I know the listeners did as well. Until next time, thank you so much for listening to Grad Talk MBA. You can find us at Grad Talk on TikTok and learn more about our MBA admissions, GMAT, and GRE products at Magoosh.com. So, with that, we will see you on the next podcast.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.